Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Dandelion Dynasty Book 4, Speaking Bones, chapters 55 and 56, Surrender and Speaking Bones. In these chapters, we are seeing the transition into potential peace, and it is rife with questions I am glad I don't have to answer. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Kyle for commissioning this episode. And Kyle is here in the chat mentioning that it is the penultimate episode, which is difficult for me to wrap my head around, to be honest. This series has gone on for so long, and the story itself has spanned such a huge amount of time that it's like really a struggle for me to think that there is a way to end this that's going to feel satisfying, because I am so used to nothing having an ending. It's always the movement into the next part of the story. And endings are a difficult thing to pull off at the best of times. Like, you know, that's a notorious thing that authors talk about. And there are so many writers out there that people will be like, oh, I love their work, except for they don't know how to end. You know what I mean? And I feel like this writer has been consistently impressive, I guess is the word I really want, so far. So I'm not really worried exactly. I'm just really curious. I don't know how you end a series that has been as sweeping and, I hate to use this word, but epic. I mean, you know, I don't like that word because it tends to be overused, but there really isn't another word for what he has done with this universe. And how do you wrap it up? I really talk about questions that I'm glad I don't have to answer. Like, I'm glad it's not on me to find a satisfying way to wrap this sort of thing up. I'm sorry, guys. I am just like, I took a COVID test and I don't have COVID, but I am not feeling great today. So forgive me if my voice is sort of hoarse. I am just like dealing with some kind of gunk. So, all right, let's begin with 55. And we are in the first month of the 12th year of the reign of a season of storms. And it says, by tradition, the first degree from a new sovereign should announce a reign name, one that would be auspicious and set the tone of the administration. But Empress Shizona declined to do so. And so the fact that it's still the reign of season of storms, that is significant. I still, though, really want to know where the name Shizona came from. And I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, we never got an explanation about why Kuni changed his name to Ragan either. You know, if there is a reason that I'm forgetting, let me know. But I really, I don't need an explanation, but I would love to just be told, why they chose, is there a significance to the words? Is there a tone they're trying to set? There's just a lot of significance to a name, and I had forgotten that when they take on a title like this, it's not simply she's, Princess Thera is still Peceuthera. I think she's kept her name abroad. But Shizona, where is that coming from? If anybody knows, please tell me, because I'm just really curious about it. And I'm consistently surprised that it wasn't explained or mentioned. I feel like I'm taking crazy pills here, because he tends to explain everything in these books. So it's just a bizarre, I won't say oversight, because it feels like it's got to be on purpose. But so I had ended the last episode by mentioning that I overread a little bit. And so the fact that Gia is helping to write a book is not a surprise. However, I will say that the name of the book being Confessions, I am so sorry. I don't know if Ken Liu is familiar with Usher. I am guessing no. But you guys, I could not get the song Confessions out of my head. For those who don't know, Usher released an album named Confessions, which was one of like the top albums that he's ever released and one of the best selling like pop albums ever. And there's a song named Confessions, which is so catchy and that I could probably sing to you word for word at this point. So I just immediately, that was in my head. But evidently, she is telling her entire story. So in, the previous chapters, when I was sort of like, I don't understand why it is so important to her to keep this totally secret. Evidently, it's not that important to like ensuring that things happen the way they need to happen. She can still tell her entire story. And in fact, not just to like those who are at the top of the administration, but to the people, which is particularly surprising, but also I really like it. She's writing a tell-all, which is amazing. And what we find out is that it's sort of like taken everybody by storm, and everywhere you go, folks are like talking about it and arguing with each other about the choices that she made and whether they were good ones. And I can only imagine, like we live in a universe at this point where there are tell-all novels all the time. And even when there are as many as there are still some that come to the forefront of the conversation anyway. When Prince Harry released his, more recently, Britney Spears, and everybody was talking about them on all the platforms. So imagine the effect of something like that, but in a world where books are brand new, where this does not happen. So they can not only all find out, but they're finding out in her own words and when I say books are brand new, obviously they're not like books, but like mass produced books. But yeah, of course, this would just be completely monopolizing everybody's time and their thoughts. So Diana, and Shizona are in negotiations. Dara's Imperial Army would assume control of Ukita'asa, but with a guarantee that the Liuku would be unharmed until a permanent treaty had been ratified. The shipments of food and medical supplies reached the two islands just in time. As teams of doctors and soldiers fanned across the islands, they found the survivors of this last merciless winter, both Liuku and native, both oppressor and enslaved, to be as emaciated as skeletons. There were more than a few reports of cannibalism. And they are going into overdrive to try and save them, not only in terms of just feeding, but there are all of these physical ailments, whether from the circumstances of things or from actually being maimed. And then there's the dispersal of the Toliusa antidote. And it turns out that the antidote is made from a fungus that was actually what killed the Liuku's own fields. of Tolhusa. And there's a little thing here where Gia talks about pairings of opposites embody one of the fundamental principles of herbalism. The deadly seven-step snake of Fassa nests in shady coves where the crying boy mushroom, which secretes an antivenom, likes to grow. I'm really curious if this is true. Like if there is a precedent to this. She mentions snowdrop, known for its power to relieve fevers. And snowdrops are an actual flower, but out of curiosity, I am personally I feel an affinity for snowdrops because they are a flower that grows very heavily around where my grandmother used to live. So it was just blanketed with them in early spring, and it was so beautiful. So there's something that I strongly associate with her. And I had never heard that snowdrops were medicinally useful ever. And I looked into it and I could not find evidence. So it may be like a fictional snowdrop, in this universe that isn't the same as the ones that we have here. But anybody out there, if you do know, and this is a thing, please let me know, because I just would, something that meant a lot to me purely because of its aesthetic, actually being practically useful would be cool to know. Kyle says, I remember earlier in the series it's explained what Ragan means, but I don't know off the top of my head. Okay, I didn't remember that. Fun fact, that passage is a callback. His and Kuni have the same exchange in book 1. Really? I did not remember that. So this, of course, as much as it is a antidote to the thirst being all consuming and eventually killing you, it is not a solution to feeling the urge to take the drug again in a much more mental sense. The addictive property is overcome, but you've still got a lot of after effects. And there's a word here, a lifetime of chronic sequela and after effects, and it says, sequela is a pathological condition resulting from a disease, injury, therapy, or other trauma. Derived from the Latin word meaning sequel, it is used in the medical field to mean a complication or condition following a prior illness or disease, which I really like knowing that word. I have never heard that before. Very useful. I really hope that my brain retains it because it has become extremely porous lately and a lot is coming in and going right back out again. I have really struggled to retain new words, and I don't know when I'll get the chance to use this one, so it may be gone, but I liked it. The Garinifans suffered from the withdrawal in their own fashion, and curing them presented unique challenges. Fortunately, the Liuku Garinifan riders and grooms, relieved from Tolhusa madness, could help calm the massive beasts as herbalists poured cauldrons of antidote down their maws. Which, that sounds like a real difficult job. And this is when we find out that some of Vokufirna's, the stuff that he set aside from being destroyed, has been preserved in Krifi. And there are all of these weapons and ritual vessels, and there's tapestries and scrolls, and they were not destroyed, and they're the only things that remain. After the discovery of decoy treasures of lesser cultural worth that had led to his downfall, Vokufirna, even under torture and threat of death, had not revealed the existence of this deeper, more precious trove. The rescue workers and the gathered natives fell to their knees, weeping from sorrow as well as joy. What a fucking G. I mean, oh my God. That just is just the willingness to keep this secret, the reverence that he has for this other culture's artifacts, and valuing them so much that he would be willing to undergo torture and not give them up. And even though he knows that he is likely going to die, that they will remain protected and that somebody eventually may find them. That is so heroic in a way that is like, I think maybe some folks might not really think was that significant because it's just things, not human lives. And I definitely understand, why you might take that position. But, this is just so moving. And I really liked Vokufirna anyway. But I think I recall in the section where we find out that he was killed and that all of the artifacts that were found in his home were burned, I was pretty devastated. Like, I feel like we were in Ghost-town Ryoto's head for that. And she had been friendly with him, so she was mourning him. And just knowing that he managed this despite everything. Wow. That is just, in a story full of heroes and amazing feats, probably this shouldn't stand out to me the way that it does, but it really made an impression, and I feel like he's kind of been catapulted into my favorite characters list at this point. Kyle says, all right, gotta go. Sad that we're almost done. Bye. Bye, Kyle. Yeah, I'm sad that we're almost done too. I really am. So, let's see. Meanwhile, the freed natives, after briefly celebrating their liberation, were shocked to see that the hated Ryuku suffered no punishment. Doctors on the core island tended to the surrendered Ryuku as well as native villagers. Food was distributed to all equally. In fact, the Ryuku were sequestered from natives and protected by soldiers. When questioned, the aid team commanders explained that the throne had ordered the Ryuku be given comfort and aid as well as full protection against native reprisals. And look, yeah, I get it, man. This is the sort of thing where, and this is exactly what I meant when I said at the beginning that I'm glad I don't have to make these decisions. I absolutely would not be comfortable telling people who had gone through what these people have that they are going to need to learn to forgive and move past what happened to them, because that is what I have ordered to happen. I understand in a philosophical sense and even in a practical sense that vengeance isn't actually helpful and it doesn't really solve anything. It is empty in the end. That does not keep it from being what many people want. And what everybody underwent, it was so horrific. It's beyond imagining. Truly, I could not have invented some of these ideas had I tried. And I'm really wondering about Ken Liu and how much the actions of the Ryuku were garnered from actual historical documentation, but this is a really tough pill to swallow. And while I do think that it's the right call, it is demanding so much from a people who have already gone through more than they should ever have been expected to endure, that I would feel like I had no right to ask, really, is what it comes down to. And these policies that had minimized and would minimize suffering and death was intellectually understandable, but it provided no comfort. Yeah, that's exactly it. There is something internal that you're trying to satisfy. And there's not really a good way to do that effectively that isn't going to create another problem that you have to deal with after. So this is when some scholars come and they begin to take documentation of everything that happened to these people. And it's, again, a really tricky thing because they're sharing these stories because they deserve to be shared. But it causes the people of Dara to be turned even more against the Liuku because it's so much worse than they had imagined. Some demanded Gia be executed in the most gruesome way possible. Others pressed for Gia to be freed immediately and declared a national hero. Rival protests clashed in the streets, and the army sometimes had to be called to restore order. Some wrote screeds urging the imperial army to slaughter every surrendered Liuku and collaborator, cleansing Liuku influence from the freed lands once and for all. Others insisted that the ideals of moralism be upheld, that the leniency be the overarching guideline in structuring the peace to come. So, look, I'm going to have to pick it up a bit because I'm barely into this chapter and I'm like halfway through my time. But this is the main question that we're struggling with in this chapter. So we go to then Farah and Diana, and this is a really rough scene. Farah is, they have buried Timu and Firo, or it's an effigy of Timu since his body is gone. But the body of Diana's little brother still needs to be dealt with. And they were hoping to bury him, but she really wants him to be buried in the Liuku fashion. And Farah is like, are you sure you won't reconsider? Because she believes that the manner in which he is buried is going to be of extreme significance to everybody. And we find out what the last moments of his life were, which it was sort of surprising to me because the way it was written, them fleeing the house and then just seeing the flames, it was like the scene felt to me like they escaped with their lives, they watched the place burn down, and that was the end of it. But it turns out it was not that simple. He was in the house as it was burning, and they tried to save him, and he refused to be saved. And he says that his only regret is that she escaped the fire. Mother should have drowned you when you were born. Which, the poison of that is so horrible, that having been one of the last things that he ever says, and she's going to have to remember him this way, is awful. And it's really influencing everything she does, because being accused of being a traitor by him means that she's going to fight even harder to try and uphold anything Liuku in her negotiations, just out of guilt, sheer guilt. And Diana says, my brother must be given the Liuku rights. And Farah's like, well, we could kind of do both. And she's like, no, he hates everything Dara. I cannot betray him after his death. And we find out that Farah has been really struggling because Diana won't really give an inch in negotiations. So the fact that she's so unwilling to compromise on anything leaves them kind of at a stalemate a lot of the time. And they go back and forth until finally Diana says, he is my brother and he is not a part of your family. And Farah takes offense at this, understandably. And finally is like, everybody is turning against both of us because this shit has taken too long. We have got to figure some things out. And protesters in Ginpan almost blocked an aid fleet from departing, demanding that we cease curing the Liuku. I've just received word that a group of Liuku Thanes in Dasu killed their guards and escaped into the jungle. And Diana's like, can you blame them? They just found out that you like perverted their sacred herb and gave them this illness, and they died in some of the most shameful ways possible. Don't you have any idea of the pain we endured? And Farah is like, can I blame them? Are you fucking kidding? Yes, I do. And she says, and I blame you for behaving like a foolish child blinded by grief. Being born of the lineage of Tenryou Roatan in the House of Dandelion may feel to you like a curse. Believe me, I know. But that is what the gods have decreed for you. And when she says, all right, fine, I reject you just like my brother did, then Farah's like, oh, okay, so you've chosen to be a brute and doom the rest of your people. Then all of you are going to die. And Diana's like, you are as bad as Gia. You are evil. And Farah slaps her in the face, which I was really gratified by. Like, yeah, this girl is out of hand. And I love this. Farah says, you speak of the suffering of the Liuku from Tol-Yusa-Thirst, but you've said not one word about the mountains of corpses near Creepy, victims of starvation, overwork, outright massacre. What about the cries of despairing parents diving into the sea to drown themselves when they found out they had been fed the flesh of their children? What about the terrified sobs of children forced to dig graves for their grandparents before they were buried alive in those same mass graves? Have you forgotten the rapes, tortures, maimings, and killings authorized by Khutun Rovo, your mother and your grandfather? And Diana starts to say, not so many would have starved if you kept sending food. And Farah says, don't you dare. You're a very clever girl, Diana, but take care that you don't deploy your intellect to evade responsibility, to draw false moral equivalences, to seek the refuge of dishonest relativism. To cling to the lies of a narrative of Liuku victimhood is an act of contemptible cowardice beneath you. And that is a really beautiful way of saying it. I like contemptible cowardice, and it is beneath you. Amen. Empress Gia cultivated the worst tendencies already present among your mother's thanes and warriors to accelerate the fall of a corrupt empire. And she exacerbated the suffering of the people in unredeemed Dara in order to prevent the deaths of millions in a general all-out war. But Khutun Rovo's aim was enslavement, subjugation, the extermination of the people of Dara. She wanted to cleanse the land of all traces of the people who were already living here. If you pretend not to understand the difference between them, then you are an utter disgrace to your people and especially your father. And then Diana just starts crying. And Diana is remembering her father in a more kind way than I was sort of expecting, because the way that her brother was talking to her made me worry that she had completely turned her back on anything Dara, and that would include her father and his aims for peace, you know? And it's just I really, really appreciated Farah here just being like, how the fuck dare you try and act like these are the same thing? What are you talking about? And truly, that she deserved more than a slap, in my opinion. But, you know. Had the accommodationist faction gained the upper hand, do you really believe the natives in unredeemed Dara would have been free? Liuku supremacy was the foundation of Ukutaasa, and a gentler, kinder enslavement would still have been enslavement. Diana wanted to argue, but she couldn't. In her heart, she knew that Farah was right. Timu couldn't accept that evil cannot be appeased away. By the time he realized the role he had played in aiding and abetting evil, it was too late. And yeah, any time that you've got a group that just wants to exterminate the other group, that's a wrap on that group. Even if not everybody wanted that, Kutanrovo held such sway that it's enough to condemn all of them for falling in line. And oh, God. Farah, she says, I don't know if I can judge your grandmother. It's common to see powerful lords sacrifice the lives of the common people to benefit their loved ones. But Empress Gia sacrificed everyone she was close to, including herself, to benefit the lives of the common people. In her single-minded pursuit of the goal of freeing the people of unredeemed Dara and building a lasting empire of peace, she committed terrible acts. To understand is not the same as to forgive. I understand why Peku Tenryo and Tambanaki did what they did, but that does not mean I forgive them either. Your grandfather and mother dreamed of a better life for the people of the Scrublands, but they tried to achieve it by killing and enslaving others, and that cannot be countenanced. However, you can still realize their dream through another path. The Liuku must become a part of Dara. So what follows, to summarize, is a conversation where they argue whether or not the Liuku people can be integrated fully, and if that's absolutely necessary. Diana really wants to stay separate and hold on to their own traditions and their own culture to a degree, which Farah just believes is simply a recipe for an ongoing conflict between them and the Dara people, that seeing that they hold themselves apart is just going to keep the bitterness alive, which I really do understand. But I also think asking them to just completely assimilate and give up everything that made their people who they were is unreasonable as well. And, Farah's talking about how the people of the Scrubland are survivors who adapt, that this is true. And Diana finally is like, all right, look. Because Farah says when doubt ends, evil begins. So Diana's like, look, here's the thing. We really do have to stay separate. We need to keep some of this alive. And I know that you're acting like you're sure if we do that, everything is going to completely continue to simmer. But you just said that acting like you know the future is the beginning of the end. How can you be sure that doing this is the wrong way? You can no more force a people to call themselves by the name of their enemies at point of sword than you can force my brother to call himself a child of the house of Dandelion. But the heart is a living thing that grows and learns, and with time, the unimaginable becomes real. The mightiest thunderstorm will not leave a single mark in the stone floor of the courtyard of this palace, yet the islands are full of valleys carved by the flow of trickling springs over eons. So basically, they will become Dara over time, but let that be an evolution that is natural and something that happens, as they become accustomed to living here and generations follow. Don't tell them that they have to all change their names and give up everything they know. And she says that, this is what my parents wanted, and I know that that failed them, but I'm coming at this from a completely different direction. And I have empathy for both sides of this situation. And then ends it with, it is the more interesting path. So this is when Diana kneels in front of her and pledges that she surrenders and that she is going to stay PICU and, this whole thing, this ritual. So they have to negotiate all of these terms and come to an assembly. And there are a lot of refinements. I'm not going to get into all of these. But overall, they're going to be given some lands and they are going to be allowed to graze cattle, but they won't have enough space for huge herds. So they're going to need to cooperate with the people in the neighboring areas. And the proposal to give the land of the dead victims to the surrendered Liuku was extremely controversial. And the veteran societies, as well as the majority of the College of Advocates, argued strenuously against it. They contended that the move amounted to yet another act of violence against the memory of the victims. Again, yeah, I get it. The Empress pointed out that the Liuku and their descendants had to be settled somewhere, and the solution disturbed the existing population and distribution of the islands the least. But the objectors refused to yield. In the end, Zomi proved the decisive vote. She volunteered not to seek title to the land in Dasu that had belonged to her parents, instead dedicating it to the resettling of a Liuku family. This isn't an act of forgiveness, for it is neither my place nor desire to give absolution to the horrors committed by the Liuku. But the dead do not need land. The living do. Let those who will now live on the land I was born to refill it with hope and love. That is remarkable. Zomi, again, what a fucking G. Unfortunately, what Zomi does next when Farah comes to thank her is resign. And Farah is like, what the fuck? But Zomi is like, look, I'm linked to Kogo. We're part of the old regime. People are not going to trust us. You really do need a fresh start. And then she starts talking about the examinations. And she takes out a codex of warped pages, a jar of pickled caterpillars, blah, blah, blah. Your sister doesn't write much, both because it's hard to pass a message through the wall of storms and because the most important message of all, that she succeeded in her mission to stop Liuku reinforcements, is best conveyed by the very absence of anything coming through. However, she did write me a few times, and she has these turtle shells. And she couldn't write explicitly lest the letters be intercepted. She wrote in a code that only I would understand. She went on to explain the role the Kunikin engraved shells had played in Gia's deception of Tambanaki. The Kunikin, a reminder of where Zomi and Thera spent their first night together, was a private message of love, but the Liuku had read it literally upside down and saw in it a promise of more Garinnafins from the homeland. And then this last letter, an etching of the blooming lotus, arrived just a few days ago. Thera has put down roots in Ukyugonde. She is the lotus seed that has carved out a new life on distant shores. She's telling me to live this mortal span to the fullest. And Farah is like, so what does this mean? What will you do? And she says, I'm not planning on having children, but I would like to teach. I would like to spread the knowledge that Luan Ziaji gave me. And I'd like to spend some time with Savo. I don't know my brother well, and he's the only family I have left now. Y'all, Can I tell you that I straight up forgot she was related to him? Like, completely. I was truly like, oh, right, okay. Like, you know, half brother, but nevertheless. Then I'll travel back to Dasu with the remains of my parents so they can find peace under the earth of their ancestral village. There, I hope to start an academy where all may attend for free. That is just beautiful. Like, I love this so much. And Farah says to study under a former head of administrator to the imperial examinations is every scholar's dream. And Zomi is like, no. I'm not trying to, like, teach people so that they can go take the exams. I'm trying to focus on subjects that are interesting. Like, you know, Jia defended the Liuku with an herb. Emperor Monodetu drew on the help of companions who disdain the system. There should be ways for men and women of talent to find happiness beyond one path. And talks about how, like, as much as the imperial examinations are helpful to measuring certain things, they aren't the only way. No matter how much we reform them to be more equitable, they will always serve the system. And they're going to become more complex as time goes on. Out of necessity, you have to, like, add addendums to things, make it more complicated. A totalizing system turns always into tyranny, and there must be room for the absence of system. There should always be flowers blooming outside the walls of a garden. Raoji was right. The cord lotus seed should be most prized, for in that emptiness lies infinite potential. And I really liked that idea. Like, it's almost like she's talking about starting a trade school. You know what I mean? Instead of a college. And I know that, especially as Americans, we can tend to, like, romanticize more blue-collar work and make it seem like it's this noble thing. It's just a different type of work. There's nothing more or less noble about it. But there is a value to it that really was shunted to the wayside for a while. And I feel like it's kind of nice that people are beginning to see what is worthwhile in it again. So Diana Diana and Farah are talking again. Do not single out the Liuku for special treatment. Such aid would be necessary for all the citizens, including those whose farms were expropriated by the Liuku. Diana nodded. Speaking of power, will I be allowed to promote the Liuku into positions of power? Of course, said the Empress, taken aback by the question. Liuku magistrates and officials would be not only allowed, but perhaps even necessary. You'll need them to maintain not just the appearance of fairness, but also the substance. A fair Ukutuasa welcoming to all cannot be exclusively administered by only one people. And Diana is just like, oh, thank God, because she really thought there would be some, like, restrictions on that, which I understand, and which, again, likely many people are going to fight what the Empress is saying here. She's correct, but that's not going to mean this is going to be an easy sell. So it turns out, like, Diana's like, so they have to pass the imperial examinations to become Tokodawiji or even Kashima. And she's like, yes, they will have to learn the language of Dara and become proficient in the patterns of thinking. Some Liuku parents will never permit their children to go to school to study logograms. That is their right, but Anno Classics and officialdom will not be the only means to success. Dara is changing, and talented individuals will all have a path toward elevation. Many Liuku will see this as an attempt to pressure them to become more like the natives. Finally, the meaning of the Piku's line of questioning became clear. The Empress answered carefully. Different parts of Dara are different, and it was Emperor Ragan who set the precedent of tolerating local variation. To this day, many in Kokru continue to prize writing in old logograms that Mapidere abolished. Our policy will not be a mirror image of the Ryukyu. There will be no laws against Ryukyu language or religious practices, no legal distinctions. But there must be one standard to bind its peoples. If the Ryukyu see advantage in entering government, they will learn the Ano classics and other new forms. And Diana gives a concession and is like, okay, I believe that. So there's not going to be a trial. Many people are like angry about this, a trial for all of the Ryukyu people. And she is like giving her basic answer of like, everybody was as guilty as anyone else. And there were even Dara people who were collaborating to survive. And, you know, there were rapes, but then children were born, and some of those children, like, how are they to be dealt with and punished? And on the islands, some of our people grew really wealthy through all of this. How do you achieve justice for all victims without drowning the sea in blood and choking the land with bones? I really like that line. Without drowning the sea. I mean, drowning, like, that's just a really good line, you guys. It's really effective. The victims must not be forgotten. No, absolutely not. To forgo the pursuit of justice isn't to resign ourselves to the blithe oblivion, and shouldn't be taken as a gesture of absolution. The Imperial Treasury will allocate funds dedicated to the goal of remembering. No one was happy with the non-resolution clouded in doubt, but they accepted its necessity. So, then she has to dismiss Aya Mizote. Oh, thank God, you guys. Uprisings had erupted. Aya and Goztan had been dispatched to quell them. The military monitor's report of Princess Aya's performance was scathing. She had been hesitant, vacillating, reluctant to engage with the rebels. Had Goztan not decisively assumed command, many more lives, both Ryukyu and native, could have been lost. And I can't remember. I may be remembering this incorrectly. And I'm not sure if it was at the beginning of this book or the end of the last one. I think it might have been the last book. There is a description of how somebody coped in a battle sent to Gia, and their description was pretty scathing as well. And Gia was like, well, this guy is just biased against her, and so he is embellishing how bad it was. And I remember at the time, I couldn't tell whether or not she was right about that, or if she wanted somebody who was borderline incompetent in the position, and that's why she just pretended not to really believe it. I think because of the way she disdains the military, it's probably the latter. But yeah, this whole thing, she was relieved of command. And then Aya, despite her shoulders slumping and Farah thinking like she's super upset about this, Aya looks up and is like, oh, thank God. I tried to pretend that this was the job I wanted to honor my mother, but I fucking hate it. I do not like killing. You know, my mother's name has been cleared. I finally feel like I can let this go. And I really loved that scene. Like, Aya, she's not a fool, but she was just so obsessed with upholding her mother's legacy. And after the conversation that Goztan had, I can't remember if she had it with Diana, but she talks about the fact that Tambanaki was just way too beholden to her father's dream. it's interesting to see how the shadow of their parents hangs over so many of the characters in these books and influences their, not just their like values and the way they think, but they feel such obligation even after their parents are gone, sometimes more so because they're gone. And just even in death, they can influence. You know, like Firo went to war against Gia because of his mother. And what did she care if he got vengeance? You know, it's just really the fact that this has spanned so much time and the ways in which Ken Liu has shown that things will echo through generations is really well done. That's all I've got to say about that. It's just very well executed. So let's see. No one asked whether the Empress loved the consort designate. How was that relevant? Besides, the Empress would surely take other consorts and lovers as she pleased in the future. The young man in question had in mind something he wanted to do, and he went to speak to his mother to get her blessing. I, for one, am delighted that Farah gets to be with him. I was not sure how that was going to go, but with everything, it really makes a lot of political sense as well. And of course, there's more bad news about the way that people, the Liuku people, are coping with everything. She also told him signs of hope. Itinerant Mendis monks who healed all they met, regardless of the tongue they spoke. Narus and Kuleks, who, though weaponless, tried to defend native villagers from rebel raids. Native villagers who sheltered Liuku orphans and hid them from roaming vigilante clans. The young man listened mutely, and for her part in quelling the rebels, the Inner Council had awarded Gostan the rank of 3rd General of the Cavalry. She would be in charge of the squadron of Garinifins seized. And honestly, that's amazing. Like, she really must have made a fucking impression. Incredible. So he tells her that he wants to take on the Dara name that he was given and hold on to it. And she gives him her blessing, even though, like, you know, she's been put in the position where she's been forced to give up her name, but she knows this is a completely different situation. So he goes by Kinri Rito, and that's the name that he is going to hang on to. Oh yeah, here it is. I haven't forgotten what you taught me about poetry. I understand your imperial name. Oh, it's here. Oh, thank God. The classical Ano logogram in Farah's new name was usually translated as observant. But for those familiar with the history of Old Zana, the local topolect reading for the logogram Shizona was an onomatopoeia for the sound made by the rustling knot bells worn by dancers at the court of Krifi. Words lie, but not the music of your limbs sweeping over me, moonlit ocean waves. Centuries ago, the Imagist poet Suzare had composed those lines about her lover, Lady Jito of White Sleeves. One could readily imagine the gentle susurration of the knot bells as the legendary beauty twirled, glided, and leapt across the flagstones of the grand audience hall. Farah had continued the musical theme of her family in choosing an imperial name, but it was coded to allude to the moment when she and Kinri had fallen in love. The dream of a life free from obligation, duties, politics, and the weight of history and re-remembering was not dead, only put on hold. I'm so glad that I reread that part, because I read this, I did, but somehow with everything that was going on, because there's a lot, and I'm almost at the end of my time, and I have not come even close. I really have got to pick up this like pace here. So she next has to deal with Gia. And Gia basically is like, can I be frank? You fucked up. You have screwed everybody. It's going to blow up in your face. There's going to be more violence. You have set us up to just have unending cycles of violence and hatred. And I don't know what the fuck you were thinking, is what it boils down to. And Farah, you know, this is everything that she is personally afraid is true. So for a moment, she just is overwhelmed by fear. But then she's like, you know what? You think you know everything. But you couldn't, like, understand Firo. He convinced the people of Dara to back his war, even though you made it sound like it was an impossibility. And then, when everybody's lives hung in the balance, he stayed his hand without your help, even though you didn't think he was capable of that. And because he defeated the Liuku with honor, they view him with a great deal of admiration. It was out of that sense of trust he had earned that the Liuku, after the fall of Ukutaasa, believed they could come to Pon to seek peace rather than struggle on. You never saw what kind of man he could become. You never foresaw that even in death, Firo would do his part to defend and preserve the lives of the people of Dara. You cannot read that which has yet to be written. At length, Gia said, "Neither can you." "No, I cannot see the future. I cannot be sure my decisions will be judged by history to be right. But to deem only that which guarantees survival to be virtuous is to think like Kutan Rovo. To believe that only that which leads to victory and conquest is to follow the faith of Tenryou. Compassion and empathy are not safe and easy paths, and they require the striving of all the people of Dara for generations. But such is the lot of mortals." And Gia says it is both a curse and a manifestation of grace. She bowed deeply to the Empress. "You sound just like your sister. I am glad it is your hand that holds the seal of Dara." I really liked this moment. I can't decide if Gia is swayed by her actual argument, or if it simply feels like at least Farah is thinking things through, so she's willing to relinquish the control here. Like, not that she really has a choice. I just really wish I knew what she had really been thinking in this moment. And this is when Princess Diana comes in and meets Gia. And Farah, leaves the room and lets the two of them meet. It says, "A winter's worth of ice could not melt in a single spring day, and neither could a wound lasting half a lifetime heal in a single meeting, but it was a start. I think I've just found the name for my reign." And I don't remember if we find out what that name is. I don't think so in this section. But I'm over time, but I'm going to continue on because 56 is a pretty short chapter. Life returned to the Scrublands, as did wars. The remnants of the Liuku and the scattered Aegon tribes fought and clashed, killed and died. But the Narrows and Kulaks, unmoved by such high ideals, fought for a much simpler story that was no less compelling. Let's see, I'm trying to find the spot here where, okay, here it is. Rumor spread across the Scrublands on the wings of Gerinifins and by the mouths of the wandering Tantu Leonaro. Something was happening in Tatan Rio Alvovo. As the spring winds blew across the salt flats, hulking beasts of pure white bone emerged from the haze. Cobbled together from the bones of aurochs, mouflon, and dead warriors, they brought to mind not so much the warlike monsters that had ended the Fifth Age, but fantastic beings of grace, lightness, playfulness, ethereal whales with wing fins, wobbly muntjacks with stilt-like legs. And I sent Kyle a video of this guy who does wind, like, what's the word I want to say? I guess just wind-powered creatures made out of, I believe, PVC piping, which looks very much like bone because he's using like white piping. And oh my God, they just reminded me so much of these Arukua Tokua. In the place of hearts, the beasts had in their empty rib cages massive dangling charms. Propelled by the strong wind that undulated the membranous sails over their backs, the beasts strode resolutely out of the salt flats and spread in every direction. The singing mechanism had been adapted from the divine voice, the oral weapon that had once devastated the Liuku host. And so they have these bones inside them, the scrolls, that create vibrations and pumps like out through the sort of vocal cords of these creatures. This is banana pants. Like, oh my God. I just like the extent of this. Can you imagine? It's just I have trouble even imagining what I would think of this if I were a person of the Scrublands. It would feel like a miracle that I was seeing, you know, the sound and everything. The voices spoke of the past, of the beauty that had once been, the beauty that was still within reach, the glory that had once illuminated the city of mounds on the shore of a sea of tears, the drying of rivers, the shrinking of the lake, the ascension of Thera, and the love that allowed Tokval to give her his last breath. Adapt, adapt, sang the voices. Discard old enmities. The way forward is not to be afraid of change. We have always changed. We always will to be who we are. The best way to honor our nature is to remember the future. Come to the barrows. As the singing bone beasts wandered the scrublands, passing herders, Liuku, Aegon, and Tanta Leonaro stopped to listen. Long-haired cattle lowed, Garinnifins moaned, dogs yelped. The hearts of the people were moved, enticed by the spirit portrait of the soul of a people. And some of the, people understandably are like, oh shit, they're attacking, somebody go after them, which, they sound like they would be pretty intimidating, so I really can't blame them for reacting this way. The Pharaoh Garinnifins that had been released by Thera came to their rescue. Survivors of the Pharaoh Garinnifin assaults affirmed that the singing Arukua Tokua were protected by the gods. Legends grew, myths multiplied. In time, some of the beasts would become tangled in this grass sea and collapse. Others would be destroyed by storm and rain. Still others would fall prey to fire cattle stampedes or Garinnifin breath, commanded by the ambition of thanes and the pride of chiefs. But once the story of the gathering of life had been told, it couldn't be untold. Tyrants could burn books and bury scholars, slaughter story dancers, and mutilate spirit portraits, but a lung story passed from mouth to ear, from heart to mind, could never be silenced. And I am really interested to see how this goes, because what it seems like she's attempting to do is establish civilization out here, like a permanent, instead of the nomadic situation that they have been living with. And I really wonder if, look, I know that I need to give this up. I really know that, okay? I just need to say this. I still want Thera to go home and see everybody one last time. I recognize her job there is over. Here is where she needs to be. The journey would be so long that and how long it takes between the Wall of Storms opening, I'm not sure there's really enough justification for her going home that it's worth the time that she would spend. But I want her to tell everybody what she has accomplished so far and to see what has happened since she has been gone as well, and what a huge corner they've turned. I appreciate that she can communicate a very little with these turtles, and she has said she set down roots, which I believe is meant to simply be, I'm not coming back ever. I don't believe she intends to, and I accept that, but I wish so much that there was a way, you know? She has managed something I would have thought was impossible, frankly. And I feel like she could have been an amazing leader of Dara, but this was an even more difficult challenge. And she has managed it, and that's remarkable. So, all right, I have to wrap up, but thank you guys again so much for hanging out with me. Thank you, Kyle, for commissioning this. I hope folks out there are enjoying the coverage. There's only one episode left, and then this series is wrapped. Hard to believe. I feel like I've been covering it for years and years. Maybe I have. I don't even know when the first episode was. But I'm really, really excited, but I will be sad to say goodbye. All right, everybody. Thank you again. Until next time. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.